Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Shadowverse. Today is Wednesday, January 6th. For the accountability section today, we will mostly talk about the fact that I finished the single player storyline of this, trying to catch up. Since the storyline mode hasn't actually aired completely, I figured it would have been smart to have done the new content that had been added. It wasn't smart, frankly, because about at this point for this character, none of it is translated to English, which then created an issue where I realized that the English has not been translated correctly at all. The subtitles are completely different. Not completely different, but you're running about 60% off of what a literal translation would be, as far as I can tell, as someone who barely knows Japanese. But I know enough when I hear somebody say arigato, that means thank you. And when somebody says, like, sumimasen, that means thank you very much, or please. Uh, but yeah. Or when they say baka, that's a great one. Like Selena here as a character calls Miser an idiot, which in Japanese is baka. And so there's this long running thematic kind of pet name she's giving him, calling him an idiot, and they literally translate it into a different word in the subtitles in English every single time, which destroys the theme. But on top of it just not being correctly translated and editorialized way too much, and I mean, at a certain point it I don't think falls down to a level of censorship as much as it falls down to a level of the localization team thinking they're smarter than the original writer of the game, which I would argue they aren't. Even and that's saying probably a lot because the original writer of the game's not that good. But it also just drags out this. So it was like 2.5 hours to 3 hours to do this story, 2.5 to 3 hours to do this story, and then coming back and doing this last part was like 2.5 to 3 hours of doing this story. And this is labeled as Fate's Trigger Conclusion, and you get a title when you do chapter 11 here, but the story doesn't actually end here. It ends on a huge cliffhanger, and that's really weird. It also, in that last chapter, gives you 3 options, and literally only one of the options actually works. So, up until that point, it had been a linear, kinetic visual novel in the sense that it just goes from point A to point B. There's no branching paths, and now they added options that were really just fake options. But certainly for a day's work, that was a lot of work. So that's pretty much all I did. I'm still going through loops trying to figure out what is the best way to synchronize and back up, and which of the Docker containers on my server is the right container to use. This is almost completely down to the fact that there is just a significant amount of Docker containers that have been made that are just not made well. They don't have good setups to them. See, the thing here that I'm confused about is we're registered here and we're registered here, but we're not rewarded here or here, and literally that's either going to be handed to us in a day or two, or something. I made a mistake there. We haven't been getting the daily quests for private matches. That's fine. That makes a lot of sense that we wouldn't be getting those anymore. There was a limited number of those. So that puts us in a position here where we can buy packs but we don't really want to buy too many. Like, first of all, we don't want to buy any of these at this point. We want to just build up this pile until they come out with the half expansion there. As far as rival, there might be an argument to opening those at some point, but at the moment we are still just trying to do this. And I can't open a ridiculous amount. Let's just make sure there aren't any tickets that we somehow picked up on this. And it is weird that the tournament mode tickets have like significantly slowed down too. That we're not getting any of that. So I'm just gonna buy one. That's a little anticlimactic to buy just one, but I need to build up the gold, and without succeeding at the daily quest, which it is fairly possible that we will just have a lot of failure on daily quest completion. It's also a little less motivating, certainly, to try and play Shadowverse when you are trying to get other things done. Like, ideally, I would have wanted to have had half of yesterday's time be more around the beginning of playing a horror game for the mid-April 2nd Halloween section. Okay, I guess we're gonna just play Forcecraft and Dragoncraft today. Still getting treasure chest, I guess. It's a slight spoiler for the main story, but I don't think anybody really should waste their time going through the main story other than just to get the rewards and skip the story, because it's just not that good. But it definitely ends on a spoiler, so if you want to skip ahead or not listen for the next minute, the spoiler is that Orisa is like completely defeated, and apparently the bad guy is going to be able to take over her body completely. That's, storyline wise, a bold move in what has been a very unboldly written visual novel. So I kind of applaud that. It makes a lot of sense to potentially get rid of some of the original characters in general. But it's also such a bummer ending where they've killed off a lot of the characters that they just introduced in the 2 newest episodes, that it kind of feels like too many people died and the game is just going to reset the universe and undo everything. So yeah, but there's no more story for a while, obviously, and I plan on not really doing any more of the story for probably 6 months to a year, because I want to really make sure it's completely translated to English, and I am definitely going to make that make sure that's the case, because I don't like the visual novel experience where I have to sit there and read everything, and it's should by now definitely scare me away from ever playing any other visual novels again, where I've barely played maybe 2 or 3 at this point. Let's go ahead and get through the video game news, because there's no reason to stretch things out here. Yeah, for the Docker containers, I did finally look at Ubiquity, which is a web server that has a bit more focus on comic books, so it could take comic book files and put it in in a separate folder and kind of a separate library. But unfortunately, it really doesn't offer anything at all as far as a level of complexity or usefulness. Honestly, if you were going to do your best bet a virtual machine running Windows, running comic book, no, not comic rack, still would probably be my suggestion if you wanted a kind of proprietary web server that handled comic books better. Or you just use Calibre and you make a different library, because you can have sub libraries in Calibre and you just put the comic books there. Calibre has a fully fleshed out application designed to convert and upload ebooks to devices. Ubiquity does none of that. It's just, you're on a website, you can either try and read it on the website or you can click the download button. And certainly that might be in part a great example of what the difference is between having a web server that is a generic PHP run web server where you have dynamic pages of a sort, but it really isn't a bare metal application with that can move fast and have a lot of abilities and functions, versus, say, an HTML5 type web server that has much more dynamic applications and still probably isn't as good as a bare metal binary application. So yeah, I feel like it would be fairly silly even trying to use Ubiquity as the web server part, which is lacking on Calibre, because Calibre's own web server is pretty simplistic, but there's already a solution there to replace that. And as far as the backup and syncing, I'm kind of going around in circles. Like, ideally, according to what I'm getting from Google results, I should use a software called Unison to do two-way sync. But I think honestly using rsync is the industry standard, and it may, even though rsync by default does not do two-way syncing, you can certainly update one side and then update the other side and just have it in two motions do a two-way sync. And I think that's really what it's just going to come down to. So even though I already have the secure FTP server set up, I may replace that image with an image that will handle secure FTP and rsyncing both through SSH better. And so as long as that image actually works and I can actually configure it, there's a large amount of Docker images that you can find that literally have no instructions or environmental variables or anything. So it's like, this might work, but I'd have to basically figure out how I'm going to use it at all. Part of that is because I'm using Docker Compose and Compose files too, because you could certainly just use Docker to run a program with a command line. And I think a lot of the images are designed just to do that, which that doesn't really help anything. Like, that's not how you're going to deploy potential servers. But if I can get the syncing to work, then in theory, and this really is just a theory, then when one of these, when my main server is deployed, I could take a small folder of files and put it on a different computer, a fresh install of Linux, and then tell it to bring up the new server, and it would just start copying all the other files, all the configurations, all the backups, and be a redundant mirror to the original server, which that's ideally what you would want. If you can get it to actually work that way, which seems to be part of the if. There is, can you actually get it to work that way? Hmm. Hmm. But yeah, it is very much 2 steps forwards, 3 steps back. Or 2 steps forwards, 1 step back, if you're really lucky. And I haven't put a lot of time into it. I'm considering rewriting my emailer into an encryption email forwarder program so it runs completely using bash scripts instead of using Python. It's using Python simply because my code was based off someone else's code that was Python, but then there's problems with that because you have to detect whether Python 2 or Python version 3 is installed and which one's being used. There's perhaps a few helper libraries that in a bash script you're not going to load helper libraries. You're just going to have to use command line programs generally. I need it to more than likely take some configuration files from a secondary file so that the default program doesn't have to be hard coded for URLs and passwords, and that would be much more efficient. And so since the program itself is just running other programs anyways, there's not too much that would be there to just take one line of code and say, all right, this is how you do this line of code in Python, this is how you do this line in Bash, let's just convert it over. And then all of the scripts would be in Bash, and you wouldn't have to have a system where Python is installed. And that removes a great dependency in a situation where there really isn't a need for there to be a dependency. So yeah, I'm thinking about that too, but I'm trying fairly hard to not waste a lot of time on my server, and so I haven't really done a lot of that. Trying to move forward. Still have a lot of videos that need to be scheduled after the Halloween time frame, so I need to play the Halloween time frame, and there definitely are at least the final part of The Walking Dead, wrapping that up, Telltale game series makes sense. Then maybe Resident Evil 4 makes sense. Maybe Hydrophobia, maybe not. Playing Hydrophobia should probably be our last choice. If I was to try and play something like Fear, I don't know if the Fear series even falls deep enough into the horror genre to follow down that path. If anything, I should probably play something like Amnesia or something like that is much 100% focused around horror. The focus really is to try and get as many of the scariest of scary games, and even Walking Dead doesn't really fall under that category, but try to get them into the Halloween months and out of the other 8 months out of the year, or 10 months out of the year. But like Resident Evil 4 is so much an action zombie shooter that really is not, relatively speaking, a horror game. Alright. How can we do this now? If we hit this, and then we evolve this, and then we attack here, and then I think you just do this, and I think that was probably the best way to go about that. Wouldn't be surprised if we end up having to pause this recording in the middle of the stream. Let's start just going through the video game news though. There's really not a lot to say. I did want to mention, I suppose, since this is happening, that game Ghost Sense that came out and said they categorically will not be censored, and was complaining about a lot of threats. And they certainly did put out some threats, but they like, frankly, if you compile 100 tweets and threats and calls for censorship to your game, that very well may just be like some reset era thing. And I think I did hear that it literally was a video game journalist of no real note, which is probably true for all mainstream video game journalists, going to reset and calling for this brigading. But it's a weird situation where, yeah, I bet all these calls for censorship and accusations and what seem to be just straight up lies are saying the game contains illegal content. I bet every single one of those actually happened. I don't think this is a case where the creator is making something up, although that certainly could be a scenario that happens where a creator tries to create false controversy. But it kind of doesn't matter one way or the other, because it is more of a situation of the game creator just not being thick-skinned enough, for lack of a better description. Like, clearly there is not a legitimate amount of brigading as far as I saw on their YouTube channel. I mean, on their Steam page, there seems to be just overwhelming positivity with it. This controversy has certainly convinced at least one YouTuber that I somewhat follow to play the game, and see, that was certainly my thought, is that this game is going to get more purchases and plays on this controversy instead of less. So it's just like old gravy for them that some people try to attack it. But honestly, I imagine if you compared the number of complaints and tweets against against like CD Projekt Red, the percentage-wise even, you would find that there's probably way more complaints and tweets against CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077. And I really would say that this is stuff that you just put into the crank file as it is. It's like almost any business with any kind of forward public interaction has a crank file of people. These are just the crazy people who send in crazy letters, or and you just file away, and then you can report it to the police if you want, but the police are going to literally just put it in their crank file too. The world has slightly changed from the old days in which you just put people in the crank file and nothing ever really happens, or very rarely happens. Like, for every one like Oklahoma City bomber, there's a million people who are just crazy and never act on their crazy thoughts or actions or statements. With the advent of being able to maybe incite a few more people and brigade and SWAT, that there is a slight increase in danger, but I don't think by much. And overall, Ghost Sense, or whatever that game is actually called, is still not really an interesting looking game. I'd be very at ill ease deciding to play a game like that unless it became much more relevant through an actual controversy, or a much bigger controversy, or if it just became overwhelmingly and lastingly positive. It's still a 2.5D Watchtower style, or Clockwork style horror game, of which there's plenty of those on Steam. But I suspect, since video game wise at least, it's likely to be a slow news week for many, many weeks going forward. We may hear more about them. Moving on, Gamasutra has a job listing here for Remedy Entertainment as a technical artist in Espoo, Finland. Remedy seems to list their jobs fairly frequently. Honestly, it is probably a case that just there is a handful of companies that list jobs that they're never going to actually fill, just so Gamasutra as a website can maintain their job listing segments. I also wouldn't be surprised if literally it is just Gamasutra itself creating these segments whole cloth by simply going to game websites. The game websites, and then creating a new article based on the same old job listing that hasn't actually changed at all. One of the things I did after doing the main story of Fate's Trigger is look at the card expansion of Fate's of Rival that is supposed to be tied in with that story expansion. And honestly, it's like 80% of those cards have nothing to do with the story. There are definitely characters on the cards that have names and they don't show up. There are tons of types of characters that don't show up. Honestly, there's about only 5 cards, and they're almost all platinum tier cards that even slightly integrate into the cards themselves, which doesn't make a lot of sense, because you'd almost certainly, if you were smart at least as the game director, you'd tell somebody, we're going to take a break and I want you to be done in 6 months with the writing of the next episode of the single player storyline. And those overall concepts, you get to get the general idea and the general characters that are going to show up to me as quickly as possible, because I have to hand those over to the animators that make the cards, and we're going to design some cards around that. But it doesn't seem like that's really the case. It seems like the card expansions have, like I said, about 5 of the main characters in the story who are named and drawn the same way, and then the rest of them are general concepts of just being like frontier town or cowboys and things like that. But the main thing is that a ton of the cards summon horses. There are no horses in the main story ever. There's literally one car, and that's it that you see. So that concept is basically whole cloth made up, and it doesn't make any sense. There's wretches that are talked about, and there's one card that's a wretch in the card expansion, and then the rest of the time you see skeletons. There are no skeletons in the story, and there's like no ghosts. You see a lot of dragons. There are no dragons in the story at all. Maybe in the next 2 episodes, which very well might be set in the same world of Rival, which is half world, half city, we'll start to see dragons. But as it is now, it really doesn't make sense. And they're already on to the next card expansion past Rival, so they're not even really focusing on that. Moving on, we have a Gematsu article. The game that came out, I'd say about a year ago, Bomber Girl, is coming to PC via the Konami Amusement Game Station service. Now, I don't know if you can even play the Konami Amusement Game Station service in the West outside of Japan. It came out a year ago, and I fairly recall at that point I said, it's a shame that this is never going to come to the West. They've taken the concept of Bomberman and they've made anime girls around it, and the anime girls get like blown off skimpier clothing. But the thing to take from this is this was basically a pachinko game. It's straight up gambling, and the way they're bringing it now that all of the pachinko parlors in Japan and just arcades in Japan have been shut down due to the pandemic, is you play with 5 tickets per play, which is kind of ridiculous because then that means inherently there's going to be something that either uses less than 5 tickets on the Konami amusement game service, or you're going to win odd numbers of tickets, and they cost 110 yen, which is roughly $1.10 in for one play. You do get 10 tickets, 2 plays as a free starting gift, but there's definitely a weirdness there because you really don't have a justification to be playing Bomberman or Bomber Girl in a gambling sense anyways, and this is really just another example of Konami is Konami, and Konami is the worst because they're just so desperate to make money. So here's the Japanese how to play instructions, as it were, just to show some pictures of how the game actually plays. Is yeah, you're just walking around a bomber section, and maybe you've got some different abilities, and you've got like a map, maybe it's player versus player. You unlock some characters, and the way they're depicted here is kind of a chibi 3D version, and then depicted here more just cutesy, and they've got controller support. So this is definitely a game that would probably be well suited in a collection of other Bomberman games as, oh, this is the weird spin-off. But sticking to the idea that this only exists because they wanted to rip off Japanese people who are addicted to gambling, and so and sticking to that is kind of ridiculous. Like, but yeah, that is to steal a phrase from Jim Sterling, who I'm very happy to report I have completely like disconnected myself from listening to any of his content for, oh, it's been at least 6 months, I would say. I've managed to break free from listening to any of his content. Let's go ahead and evolve, I suppose. But yeah, the steel phrase, Konami is Konami, and Konami is the worst. Although, in all fairness, they're all the worst, and Konami is doing so little in the video game world that them occasionally showing up and being crappy is the least of most gamers' problems. They are the equivalent of a nerdy cousin or something that shows up once a year or so. They may suck, certainly, but you're not having to deal with them on a day-to-day basis, where it's you have the likes of EA and Activision and ZeniMax and Nintendo. Let's just put them all into that category, and maybe even Ubisoft. That almost on a daily basis, they're probably in the background doing some decision that affects a lot more games. It's like, if anything, Konami is the defeated character that we should not focus on anymore. we should move on to the next boss. Use video game terminology. Here we have a game on Steam called Arc Wizards 3, which looks like a side-scrolling shooter where you kind of shoot in different lanes. It doesn't look like much. It's free, and it claims to be a bunch of languages, which then makes me wonder. Let's see what we have. We have Naginata, and then Biko the Miko, Arc Wizards 1 and 2. I feel like this is a collection of 12 different games over the course of less than 1 year that they've been flooding Steam with. It doesn't really look like any of the games are really terrible, but they are kind of just the same thing over and over again, which at a certain level it just makes it feel like they're let's see. Yeah, it kind of feels like they're more just experiments in programming than they are actual finished products. So yeah, I have to definitely pass on that one. OpenCritic has this article here. The final is the important part here. Expansion of Binding of Isaac releases this year, which we've saw the trailer. Over 130 new items, more than 700 in total. Full alternate path with a brand new chapters and a new final boss and ending. Over 100 new enemies, over 25 new bosses, 2 new playable characters, 5 new challenges, over 100 new achievements, and over 5,000 new room designs, which are kind of procedurally generated. Binding of Isaac was first released in 2011, although the re-release of Rebirth is really where you would start in 2014, but really goes to show that it's been 6+ years now. It's hard to make that justification to keep on going down that route of playing Binding of Isaac. Okay, well, you hit that, yeah. And then you lose. You know, with a real final expansion, which on the other hand, it does kind of feel like you might not want to actually trust that this actually is the final expansion, because the rabid fandom of Binding of Isaac may just bring them to make more content still, and certainly people could make mods that would just add more content. But with the final expansion on my main Steam account, I think I would just want to buy everything that I don't own on that and move to play the final expansion from basically a brand new save file, which that would take an incredible amount of time, and I don't know how I could really commit to that. And see, that's where the whole concept falls apart, is that while I started my YouTube channel playing The Binding of Isaac, and I would play 3-4 hour runs, and they would just be full run, full episodes, and that's still probably the best way to do it. It was also, I think, 100 episodes, so 3 months potentially plus of just me playing Binding of Isaac Repentance from the beginning, trying to unlock things, trying to get good. Probably not even doing a great job of getting good, and certainly it is questionable how much skill is really needed with Binding of Isaac versus determination, because there definitely were some things that Some characters that had only 1 health, and either you would get very determined to unlock abilities that would increase their health, or you'd just get really good at not taking any damage. And at a certain level, I don't think unlocking all the characters guarantees you a victory, or unlocking all the items guarantees you victory. There is a argument that there is too slow of a burn as far as characters on items unlocking, where it might be better if every single run guarantees 1 new item from the get-go. You just start the game with a new random item that you've never seen before. Of course, then you very well may never see that item again. But at least with that concept, you would make some progress. I feel like Rogue Legacy is kind of in the same position there too, where a lot of the Rogue Legacy, roguelite games, which both are roguelite games, a lot of the Rogue Legacy runs tended to end fairly quickly with no real progress, or very little progress. Moving on, we have a Game of Switch article. CD Projekt Red is gearing up for vigorous action against an investor lawsuit, which I find it kind of questionable why the investors would be suing them. I mean, this really is the argument that CD Projekt Red dropped the ball and did not earn them even more money, even though Cyberpunk 2077 has been financially a massive success with sales, although we haven't really heard any numbers as far as refunds, so maybe it isn't actually a massive success with sales after you account for all the refunds. The player base on Steam has dropped, from what I heard, 3 times as fast as the player base is for The Witcher 3. So people either got tired with Cyberpunk 2077, or they just ran through it with bugs and all and finished the story, which is certainly an argument to make, is that there very well just may not be a good experience for anyone who has bought Cyberpunk 2077 at this point to go back and try and forget the bugs and start a new game from the beginning, and forget that they'd played any of the content and didn't have the good experience. Whereas somebody like me, who likes to play games later when they're cheaper, may be very well rewarded, because 2-3 years down the line, Cyberpunk 2077 might be a fairly decent experience with all its patches and adjustments. That being said, think about like Fallout 4 or Fallout 76 as examples of that. Like, Fallout 4 was kind of buggy when it launched, and it's still not an amazingly great game as far as I can tell. Fallout 76 has been patched and updated quite a bit, and it's still not a game I'd want to play. I can't really think of any experience or any game out there where it actually is a scenario where it was majorly improved. Because usually when a game is majorly improved, they re-release it as a remaster or a bundle or something to try and promote it. It's like, even Skyrim Special Edition doesn't really fall into the category of something that feels like it was greatly improved over the original Skyrim. Moving on, we have this game called Nert Online from Zachtronics, which is the company that makes all the kind of programming style games, but then they had a surprise hit with their solitaire game that they split off and sold, and this feels like this is a online fast-paced version of playing something like Free Cell or yeah, Free Cell would probably be the closest I would guess this is as far as the solitaire. The only difference is instead of it being 4 free cells, you seem to have a lot of piles of free cells, and then you seem to have just 4 stacks. It's free to play with online PvP English, no microtransactions. So if you're in the mood to play a solitaire game against some other people, probably now, right now is the time to do that. Jump into this and try it. I don't really see a reason to play multiplayer games since those experiences are going to be so random depending on who you play with, but I also don't see anything wrong with a game like this since it's free. Now, had they come back out and said that a game that looks like this was $9.99, I would have had a problem there. But I wouldn't have had a problem if they'd said $2.99. I would have said, oh, that's a little expensive, but free is the perfect price. It's real hard to argue with free with no microtransactions. Which I guess does make an argument that I probably do add at least $5.99 to the price tag of anything that does have microtransactions. And honestly, I probably should add about $20 to the mental price tag of what that would be, because if there are microtransactions, you're likely not going to have a great experience without spending at least $20. Although there are several games I've found that that's not the case. Like Destiny Child, still haven't put a penny into it, and that works very well as a gacha game that is just full of microtransactions. You can easily spend $300 a month on it if you wanted. I'm still also playing Destiny Child Defense War, and they finally did add content to the Nutaku adult game College Days, and so there's a little bit I'm still catching up with there, but I think I will almost certainly do the new content fairly quickly and then be back to the point where there's just no new content for a long time. And Shadowverse is a game that would probably... Shadowverse is probably the one thing with microtransactions in it that I would be likely to actually put money into, because it does actually drastically affect the experience, and that's kind of a shame, but that's collectible card games in a nutshell. Moving on, we have a game on Steam called Dura Vida Online, which looks like it's not really anything. You could certainly call this an asset flip game because it's just a big open wide field, but honestly I don't think I'd even go that far in this case. It just doesn't really look visually polished. It's early access, free to play, English only. Let's go ahead and hit that. And hit that. I think, to a surprise to many, Minecraft Earth came out of testing and beta, and now it's being shut down. So they're ending support June 2021. I don't think anyone was starting today. They've removed real money transactions. They're drastically reducing Ruby costs. They're all completed unreleased content currently in their pipeline. They're reducing time requirements for crafting and smelting, replacing unused crafting and smelting boosts with radius boost of the same level, granting a set of character creator items to players who sign in between January 5th and June 30th. So, yeah. Just a complete and total failure as an experiment. If anything, this also was a game that only existed because the non-video game part of Microsoft wanted to show off the Microsoft Azure Places, I believe it was called, ability, which is just kind of like a nerdy back-end service where it might have made some sense to integrate location data with augmented reality, which is another thing Microsoft has tried to push, but not really the part that's the video game part. Microsoft, not my Xbox, has not really been pushing augmented reality. And if anything, even the really cool looking Apple augmented reality with Lego, which this clearly was trying to compete with that is basically disappeared. I've never seen that actually come out and actually work, where you would think that would have been genius. And I think Lego probably is still going to try to have some augmented reality with their play sets, but the Hidden Side was the only implementation of that, the Hidden Side series of Lego sets, and that was just a cell phone app that would have some ghosts show up here and there around the play sets. And I don't think the Hidden Side series particularly sold great either. I feel like they went too cartoony with it, and they also didn't succeed to have an actual cartoon. Certainly also having any kind of augmented reality game at this point makes no sense, and they were probably bleeding money, even if they had been successful. I imagine Pokemon Go is struggling very hard to not shut down also, and the big difference there would be that Pokemon Go has Nintendo behind it, so they probably don't want to admit defeat there.
This ends here. You feel that too? If only you knew. It won't be long now.
I kind of wish when you evolved cards you could attack twice, but you can't. I literally never could figure out how Minecraft World was supposed to work, and I don't think that they figured it out either. Microsoft in general could be in a fairly bad position, frankly, because so much of their services are built around business services, whether you're licensing out Windows and Azure servers or licensing out Office, things like that. So, and Microsoft can't just have Xbox pull all their weight for the longest amount of, for years and years, and even Xbox, people can't buy Xboxes if they don't have jobs or money some other way, so that becomes an issue too. So yeah, I could easily see that we see a slowdown of releases of new versions of Office 360 Online or whatever, a slowdown of any development of new server backend services, a slowdown of using Azure. Microsoft was doing fairly well before the pandemic as far as getting companies like Instacart to use their backend Azure services to help integrate and better manipulate data and schedule and time things. But yeah, Minecraft Earth was obviously a bad decision in the first place. Moving on, TechRaptor has an article here. Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlords mod adds Game of Thrones, which I feel like you could easily assume that a mod like this has just been in the works for a while, because I suspect there isn't a ton of enthusiasm at this point for Game of Thrones. If anything, this would have been a great time where people would have gone back and watched Game of Thrones had they stuck the landing. But they didn't stick the landing, so I doubt very many people are happy with the idea of potentially going back and watching the first few seasons that were really, really liked of the Game of Thrones series just to get to the point of the Red Wedding, which I think maybe traumatized a lot of people who didn't know the Red Wedding was going to happen. And then you get to the point where Khaleesi basically becomes evil, and I think that traumatized a lot of people because I don't think at that point anybody could have read ahead in the books, and certainly then you run into the third issue of the books just not being finished. Next we have a game on Steam called Orion the Eternal Punishment, which looks like it's just a first-person shooter with a crossbow, which the problem with having a crossbow in a game is you've got to figure out how you're not taking up such a massive amount of screen space, and they have failed miserably on that one. The trick there is to zoom in so you only really see the tip of the arrow, and that's it, and then you have more screen space. Orion Eternal Punishment is free, English only, so I guess the price is right at the very least. Next we have a game on Steam called Desky, which feels like it is a spiritual successor to the Windows ski free game, which, okay, at least this gives you some reason why you would want to play a ski game, and it seems like it's expanded on the concept of something chasing you a lot more. $2.99 English only. I'll put this on the follow list, although frankly this really would be a game I'd only get to just then reminisce about Ski Free. And I imagine the only reason there was a Yeti, I don't recognize this character, Saren, Havencraft. Like, I imagine the only reason there was a Yeti in Ski Free is because they were either afraid you'd just play forever, or there was a danger of it creating a memory leak, and they were trying to ensure that you didn't run the number over an 8-bit integer or a 16-bit integer internally and run either overflow on accident, have an overflow attack by accident, or just fill up all the RAM on the computer, which definitely would have been a concern. I've started watching a YouTube channel of someone who worked at Microsoft, and he created the task manager and things like that, a few things. And one of the things he definitely came out and said is that he wrote some code there expecting this all to be temporary and that it would get replaced later, and it never got replaced later, even in Windows 10, because why would you authorize someone to spend their time changing something that already works? And that's a real good thing to point out and say, hey, yeah, you need to take pride in your work, and you need to try and program your code as robustly as possible, as well as possible in the first release, because you're highly unlikely to come back and be able to fix something. If anything, if you're coming back to anything, it's because more features need to be added or bugs need to be fixed. Moving on, Gamma Sutra has an article. Football Manager 2021 has sold over 1 million copies in record time. Which, okay, that makes some slight sense. I imagine fans of soccer, aka football to the rest of the world, are fairly starved for entertainment, as I suspect many of the football games have been cancelled. Both soccer games and American football games have been cancelled. But also, it's worth mentioning, that's definitely not a game I am interested in. It's a management sim also, so it's not actually playing soccer. Which, I wonder how many European kids are out there that dream to be a football manager instead of being a football player. That would be a fairly silly dream to have, but maybe it does exist. Moving on, Tancraft has an article here. The retro ARPG Ocean Heart splashes on the Steam in January 21st. Ocean's Heart with an S. I found a website called Pulp-O-Miser. The server Ubiquity made some sample comic books using it, and it's an interesting website that makes pulp comic covers randomly. You can put the text in there and just make your own fake pulp comic covers, which is a kind of funny thing to do, and it certainly could have more art, but you're getting free content, so you can't really complain that you could make your own. It's certainly a different style of meme you might be able to create if you're deep into that idea. And it seemed, I didn't check it, but it seemed like they made this in particular because they had like a comic book series with that same visual art aesthetic, and they were self-promoting, which, hey, that did catch my attention at least. Next we have a game on Steam called the Penguin IQ Test, which seems like it's a very simplistic path programming game that, yeah, I just don't see an actual game here. $7.19 English and French. That's far too expensive for this level of graphics.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Where? What tab am I on? Jeez. Here we have a game called Open Sorcery C++ instead of like open source, the letter C++, I guess. But if that's a programming joke, very few people would understand this. It does kind of feel like there might be a small section here where you do actually reclaim and compile your magic or drown in the sea of dreams. Like, this looks like code somewhat. The switch part looks like code. So if this is an idea that they're trying to teach C++ in a text-based video game, I feel like the problem here is you're confusing the issue a ton, because you're trying to serve two masters here. You're trying to be educational, and frankly, you're not even really saying you're trying to be educational here. Only people who know what C++ is, and I think C++ is open source, but mentioning it as open source is not. Yeah, I'm fairly certain it's open source. There's no extra benefit from knowing that. But yeah, you're definitely confusing the issue there. You're not going to do a good job teaching C++, and you're probably not going to do a better job at making a visual text-based adventure. Not visual at all. So yeah, that's not making it to the follow list. We do have some acquisitions today. Gamasutra has an article here. Pokemon Go maker Niantic has acquired the community platform Mayhem, which arguably, if Mayhem is kind of like a chat service, says the platform lets users organize custom game formats, tournaments, leagues, and more within self-made communities, and has already amassed millions of users. So it's not quite a Discord, it's not quite a chat service. So yeah, there's some things there that could be increased and improved upon. And alpha attacks if you have at least 3 play points. Use 3 play points and deal 1 of damage. Darn it. Well, we don't have 3 play points.
You crusty horseshoe.
So yeah, I guess that on one hand might be one way to say that is Niantic is throwing in the towel as far as trying to organize tournaments around Pokemon Go and their games, and they're instead just buying an existing platform and buying the team that built an existing platform. Or you could say that they're doubling down on improving that experience. Although, once again, you are in this situation where you're in a situation where you just don't have a lot of people capable of going outside, so organizing Pokemon Go tournaments is probably not a priority at this point. We have someone on the chat saying Sayoki, who says none obviously XD and then 719 question mark exclamation point. That's a scam. I'm on a 30-second delay, so I'm not really sure what the none obviously response would have been to. It's always good on chat, particularly my chat, to try to put some context clues into your comments. 719 was probably referring to a game being $7.19. Yeah, when you look at every single video game that comes out on Steam like I do, you see a lot of games that are overpriced. That happens a lot. There's what feels like a lot of money laundering going on Steam, or just people without smart expectations. In all fairness, now there might also be a lot of rich, like, Arab princes out there that just throw money like crazy. There may be a lot of whales out there, so if you put a game on Steam and you price it for even $100 and you get one $100 sale, you've probably done pretty good at that point. And because Steam has all you need to do is pay $100 to list the game, you really only need, at that point, 2 sales to have made $100 of gross profit, and then you have to just subtract that $100 of gross profit off of the cost of developing the game and all those expenses, and whatever you have after those costs is your net profit, to throw in some accounting. And certainly if you make a low effort asset flip where you've taken a bunch of free content from either the Unity or Unreal Store or some other storefront like that, and you've thrown it onto Steam and it's taken you less than an hour, pay yourself at minimum wage for an hour or pay someone else at minimum wage for an hour to put together this asset flip, then you're making like $90 profit for very little effort. And that's why you see on Steam, if you pay enough attention to it, you see a lot of people that flood the Steam storefront, at least in the hopes of that being a thing, in the hopes of that actually working. So you'll see developers who put out a lot of low effort asset flip games all at once on one day. You'll see people that try to space it out every week or every month even. But what stands out always is that a real game developer that actually puts some care and love into developing their game is never going to be able to release games that fast. Even when you have something that is super easy, like the puzzle hidden object games that companies like Big Fish Games put out, they still have to take enough, they have to put enough effort into it that they can only really release one once every 2 or 3 weeks. And Big Fish Games is particularly noticeable for overpricing their hidden object games even at that point. Let's see. There we go. Next we have a game on Steam called Canopy Sim Skydiving Landing Simulator, which seems like you skydive and land on a few kind of asset flip locations, which I think there is something to be said about this idea. Like, if you are a skydiver, you probably aren't going to be allowed to skydive and land near a lighthouse. That's pretty dangerous to potentially smack into that. You're probably not going to be allowed to land in a football field unless you're just really, really good. You're almost certainly never going to be allowed to land near the Statue of Liberty. So at least this is giving you an experience you can't have in the real world. So it's slightly not comparable to a game that is just a skydiving simulating game where you would just land in an asset flip open field. So maybe if you really like skydiving and you want to try and simulate what it feels like, although it probably doesn't really feel that way. And certainly you could also say the graphics here aren't that great. They're asking $9.99 for a VR game. It's English, allegedly full audio. That's not terrible. There is also a matter of them actually trying to brand. A lot of these things have CS for Canopy Sim listed, so they aren't. They put some small bit of extra effort into it. Let's see, let's evolve this and attack here. Moving on. Here we have a game called Salute Pie. That kind of feels like a Russian word, but we won't immediately assume that. Looking at this trailer, I'm seeing a lot of fairly pretty hallways, but honestly it's pretty easy to asset flip hallways. And I'm seeing some first person shooting, but I'm not seeing actually any enemies. Maybe there's a robot at the end of one of these. We're running into a bit of a dark screenshot syndrome also. So it seems like you're shooting robots often in the dark. It's kind of questionable. $7.03, bunch of languages. I'll give it a follow, put it on the follow list, but I wouldn't be surprised one bit if this game never gets any reviews. or gets reviewed badly. It's been out apparently, well, since January 5th, which is just yesterday. But then the Depot's update for the SteamDB.com says 8 days ago. So their information is a little bit older. I don't inherently know where the inconsistency there is, but there clearly have been some inconsistencies between the two. Nintendo directly now has acquired the Luigi's Mansion 3 developer Next Level Games, which the question I suppose comes down to, I assume this is Nintendo of Japan, the parent company. Nintendo has bought the company. They worked on Luigi's Mansion, Super Mario Strikers, Punch-Out, and they also created the Metroid Prime spin-off, Metroid Prime Federation Force. Now is a great time for companies that have money, and Nintendo is the ultimate video game company that has money to acquire people. They say this acquisition will serve to secure the available of Next Level Games development resources for Nintendo, including development expertise, as well as facilitate an anticipated improvement in development speed and quality by enabling closer communication and exchange staff with Nintendo development team. Yeah, and that's fairly bog standard way of explaining an acquisition. I think it's probably the case, if I was to guess, that Nintendo employees, particularly Nintendo of America employees, who aren't or just non-Nintendo of Japan employees, because honestly I think there is a Nintendo of Europe too, and maybe some other countries or continents. If you're not working at Nintendo of Japan, you're probably not really working on the development of new games. You're probably mostly just localizing. So if Nintendo of Japan is acquiring an outside development company, that is probably Nintendo of Japan admitting that they're dropping the ball as far as developing new games. And in all fairness, they have been dropping the ball as far as the development of new games. They've been very slow in the numbers, at the very least, as far as new content for the Switch. And you would have liked to see one extra AAA Nintendo game released every year. Minimum. You would have liked to see 2 or 3 extra made by Nintendo AA or single A games coming out from Nintendo. Particularly since the Switch isn't the greatest platform to buy indie games online, even though indie games get listed on the Switch like crazy. And I bet that probably irritates Nintendo of Japan quite a bit, is that there are ever increasing indie sales showing up online on the Switch, or just indie games coming out for the Switch that don't have the made by Nintendo logo on it. Yeah, Nintendo consoles have never really been great until Nintendo could put out their own content on it. And yeah, they've definitely been slow. You could also suspect that Next Level Games might have been purchased simply to speed up the failing development, obviously, of Metroid Prime 3, but the only thing they made was Federation Force for the 3DS, which was not really where Metroid Prime 3 is, and making more soccer Super Strikers games makes sense. Make more Luigi's Mansions makes sense. More Punch Outs makes sense. I love Punch Out. But also that there's not many companies I think that exist that Nintendo could actually acquire that would drastically change their lineup even 10 years down the line. Unless Nintendo had managed to swoop up the likes of ZeniMax or some Activision Blizzard or something like that, or THQ. You certainly would have to have been fairly careful about acquiring something like ZeniMax as Nintendo, because while Skyrim is on the Switch, a Skyrim 2 or the next Elder Scrolls game showing up on the Switch would run particularly bad and not look particularly good, so people would not be happy with that being the only place they could play their next Elder Scrolls game, and that would fail fairly miserably. And that kind of falls down for a lot of game companies, is that as more and more game companies are focusing towards either consoles that are the equivalent of PCs or just direct PC game listings, Nintendo is incapable of really competing in that field at the moment. And unless Nintendo did want to acquire a PC game developer and say, we specifically from day one acquired this developer because we're porting all of our games to PC, which would be an interesting twist, certainly. I don't think that's where it would go. I think they'd much quicker try and hit the mobile market once again, even though that's not succeeded. There we go. Next we have a game on Steam, Cobra Kai The Karate Kid Saga Continues, which makes me wonder if there was a previous Cobra Kai game. Cobra Kai is a YouTube series, I think, that has now been put on Netflix. $16.99 sounds like a really expensive TV tie-in, and the only other game developed by this developer is The Black Widow, which seems like it's a Ouija board game. Wow. So, developer really doesn't have many good games behind it. So far, it's 100% positive with 20 reviews. But man, is that an expensive price tag for something that very well may just be a cell phone port? I'm going to put this on the follow list, not because I'd actually play it or purchase it at that price, because that's far too expensive, but just because I would like to see how that goes down. Okay, how can we do this? Kind of don't want to do that. We kind of don't want to do that. So let's do that. And then put that on the field. And then I guess put that on the field. And then attack. Next, we have a Gamatsu article here. Akiba's Trip Hellbound and Debriefed launches May 20th in Japan for the PS4 and Switch. Update number 2. Revisit Akibara circa 2012. So, yeah, it is going to be weird. It's going to be weird, certainly, to have any game set in Akihabara or Akiba, um, in the times of the pandemic. This is a remaster of the original Akiba's Trip for the PSP in 2012, so it's not a continuation of the story. Which, okay. I thought it would be a continuation of the story. For what you don't, if you don't know the story of Akiba's Trip, which is specifically written so you can mispronounce it as Akiba Strip, and I guess Hellbound and Debriefed is for HD, and I didn't get that originally. Basically, you are bitten and turned into an emotional vampire of sorts, and there are other emotional vampires you have to fight and defeat, and their emotional power comes from the clothing that they're wearing. So you are attacking people and stripping them of their clothing, which it's a silly premise for a silly game. There's, I think, a bit of a longer story there, and while you are basically just doing beat 'em up actions and stripping people, you don't get them. They don't show characters outside of their underwear, so I don't think it's particularly explicit. It's a silly game that I would be probably happy with if I let a 15 or 16-year-old play it, because it is just kind of harmless, horny fun, for lack of a better experience. It didn't create any major controversies that I recall when it originally came out, other than it's just one of many Japanese games that got ignored by Western game developers. And it wasn't even ignored that much, it was mentioned. It was just mentioned with derision, as sometimes is the case. Moving on, we have a game called Shampoo Club. Now, what would be interesting is if the remaster of Akiba's Trip doesn't come to PC in the West ever, or is extremely delayed. People would be upset about that. I also vaguely feel like, and I'd have to check, I feel like that the original version of the game is on my wish list, and it never went on sale fast enough. It was just always overpriced, really, and because of it being overpriced, I could never really justify purchasing it. Okay. We hit that, and we hit that, and then return. Next we have a game on Steam called Shampoo Club, which looks like nothing. It's ugly, and it looks like it is just a single room with some ugly designs that you hack and slash characters. 89 cents English only. Let's see. What do you do to get the search bar? Yeah, you gotta zoom in twice to get the search bar. The way I have it all modified. Yep. Let's try that again. Still trying to get one victory between Dragoncraft and Forestcraft. So here we have Akiba's Strip and Undead and Undressed. And this is a different character at the beginning. And you can see how it's just kind of a beat 'em up game. You get a bunch of items and you dress up your character. It probably isn't too different from the Dead Rising game.
Is fighting despair all you know?
Don't think that this is a sequel, though. It said this came out in 2015. Hmm. Yeah. I feel like... Oh, it does actually have nudity. And sexual content. Wow, I didn't think that. What are they rating this as? Yeah, maybe you'd want to wait till a 17 or 18-year-old to play this game, but honestly, I don't think it gets that. I could be wrong. It might get more explicit. Yeah, if I was in charge of any teenagers anyways, I'd probably be fairly lenient. You know, these days, being strict doesn't really work since the internet exists. This is a weird situation I'm in, though, where I think I need to decide whether this game is the same as the remaster or whether it's telling a different tale, because it is weird that you're seeing different characters and different screenshots. Well, different screenshots make sense. Different characters, less or so. This is the energy vampire that bites you and converts you to her side. And then undead and undressed, UU doesn't mean anything to me other than, I think in Japanese leet speak, UU is for crying. It's an emoji for crying, I think. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do some research there and probably take that off the wish list. And inherently that is a problem with having a running wish list of games, is that at any point any game developer could make a new version, and one assumes that the new version or the remastered version of a game is the better version of the game, which often it isn't, or at least on rare occasions it isn't. So then you end up having to do research for a game. First of all, if you want to buy it in the first place and put it on the wish list, then you have to do research as far as, is this the right version? And then later on you might have to redo that research to find out if it's still the right version. And sometimes mistakes get made and things slip through the crack and you end up buying the non-remastered version. A lot of times they do you the favor of taking certain games off for sale once the new version is available, but only after the new version is available. So you still could easily buy a game a month earlier and not realize that the HD version has come out. Probably 3 or 4 times I have bought versions of games to then just buy the remastered versions of games, and there's not a good reason for that to have happened. Moving over, we have a game on Steam called The Fang, which seems like it's a black and white hack and slash game. It's called a dungeon crawler. It's $3.39. It's English. I don't think there's enough here. Like, the black and white aesthetic can be interesting, certainly, but in this case it just feels like it's probably a lack of ability or effort to put color in. And what they are showing me of the game just doesn't look that great. Yes, hit that. And then evolve that. And do that. Next we have Rushing Beat of Rage, which feels like they are trying to create some name confusion here as far as several fighting beat 'em up games. Yeah, and it is a beat 'em up game that seems to also have fighting bars, which doesn't make a lot of sense. That you would have just huge amounts of people show up and then you get trapped on one screen and then you're fighting people. The graphics don't look amazingly good. It's $7.19, English and Chinese. Yep, this definitely feels like a Chinese game that arguably has spent more effort than most Chinese games, but it's still not really a polished product even as a rip-off product. Because you certainly could make a beat 'em up game and rip off Streets of Rage. But then why have the the life bars at the top like it's a fighting game when it's more of a beat 'em up game? The life bars at the top should look different from a fighting game, in my opinion at least. Sort of based on what kind of game you're playing. I wouldn't want to be in a 3D platformer and have a life bar and energy and magic bar like this, because that would just subconsciously confuse me the whole time as far as what am I doing here? What kind of game am I playing?
Mortals are adorable.
It's visual touchstones, as it were. You don't want to cross the lines with visual touchstones and confuse people. Next we have a game called Sakura Mochi. Apparently mochi is eaten in Japan during the New Year, and it's fairly easy to choke on and die. So there was a story I was seeing where seemingly at least 80 people have been, over the past couple of years, 80 mostly elderly people who often can't swallow. That is one of the late stages of a person just about being dead, is that they stop having the ability to swallow even their own spit, as it were. And they will just gag and choke to death, and at a certain point there's not much you can do there. Like, they're just in constant danger. Of course, there's also speculation that some of the Japanese families are just trying to get rid of their elderly family members who are frankly holding back the entire society. Although I would say it's more the economics and the lack of being able to have a future and a job that pays well and good housing, cheap housing, that stops Japanese society from having kids, more than a direct attributable action of the elderly generation. But inside of Japan or anywhere else, undoubtedly healthcare is becoming a massive issue for everyone. And if you have 80% of your population just ever increasingly needing more and more healthcare, that does put a strain on resources of any country, to the point where in America even now there are things, there are retirement homes and nursing facilities out there that are not well designed to actually give a good life or even a continued life to elderly people. A lot of the nursing facilities are just places where you drop old people to let them die, and since they're going to be fairly neglected, they're going to die fairly quickly. There are good nursing facilities, one assumes, out there also, but you have to be certainly careful. Let's see if we do this.
Hey, let's play.
And then I evolve this.
It won't be long now.
Anyways, none of that had anything to do with Sakura Mochi. This is clearly just a low effort jigsaw puzzle. You're doing maybe 25 pieces per puzzle for $1.19. English, allegedly full audio. We see a lot of these low effort jigsaw puzzle games, and none of them ever make it to the fault list.
I have lost.
Next we have a game called Super Hyperspace Avenger, which is a widescreen shoot 'em up, and so I kind of have to applaud it being widescreen. I have to applaud it looking different from other shoot 'em ups. It's arguably not zoomed out enough for a shoot 'em up. They also are doing something that I appreciate in that, although I imagine most bullet hell shooter game players won't appreciate this, they are floating ships above your view as if you actually are observing from space or the sky. There are submarines below, so there's arguably some visual distractions in a bullet hell game that probably doesn't need it. But I kind of like this widescreen, and I like the art. It's 59 cents. Unfortunately, shoot 'em up games, not my cup of tea, so it's not going to make it to the fault list.
I did it!
Finally got that last victory I needed, which that opens the door certainly to me now just playing any kind of ranked match I want to play, so we can play some different things. And an hour and 40 minutes I'd like to wrap up too, so I want to burn through the rest of the news. Here we have a Dominant Square, which looks to me like some kind of puzzle game. Visually it doesn't look great though. It's English not supported, but free. Japanese only.
You must die!
If these symbols in this game means anything to Japanese people, I've never seen it before. Yeah, it seems like some kind of puzzle game, and I certainly would not be able to play it or understand it without it being supporting English. On rare occasions, if it was a simple enough game, I might be able to play a game that doesn't support English, but most cases, that's a no-go. Gematsu has an article here. Sony Interactive Entertainment has ended production of all PlayStation 4 models except for one in Japan, and production lines are going to be used to make PlayStation 5s instead, which that feels like fairly simple. The only PlayStation 4 models that continue to be manufactured and sold in Japan is the standard PlayStation 4 Slim 500GB model in black, which launched in 2016. And I would argue the reason that they're continuing production of even that in Japan is because the PlayStation 4 has not sold particularly well in Japan, and so they're probably still getting a decent amount of sales of the PlayStation 4. I don't think there's a real need to continue production of new models if you were just going to make parts and service old models. There definitely was a pricing issue, certainly too, where you were potentially confusing the market if you continued to have several different PlayStation 4 models when you really want people to be buying the PlayStation 3. There's no way to kill this guy, is there? It's that guy. I hate that guy. Next we have Trump versus COVID, Save the World Clicker. This is a political joke game for 84 cents, English only. That definitely not going to play any games like these. Still surprising that games like these that have Trump or COVID in the name aren't getting red flagged and at least looked at by some employee at Steam. And I will say that I do not expect for at least the next 6 months to see any complete elimination of troll joke games coming out on Steam. I think we can just go ahead and make the assumption that that is just going to keep on happening.
Raise your blade. This is our way out.
Next, we have a game on Steam called Amazing Joe's Journey, which this character seems very zoomed out, and he looks like he might be an Arabian guy on a magic carpet. He looks like his face is black, which I don't know if that's blackface or not. Like, is fairly zoomed out here. I don't think it really matters one way or another because the actual game here is what looks like a point-and-click adventure game. Seems pretty bad, and the reason he's on a magic carpet seems just because they didn't want to animate a walking animation. If they want $24.99 for this English-Polish game. The main character is Joe, who landed in forest on his flying carpet and wants to find a treasure. James Amazing Joe's Journey is the fourth game from the ATA Game Studio. We are making games for 5 years for you. Enjoy. If it's their fifth game, it's the first one they put on Steam, and they certainly are asking a high price. Okay. Do this.
Is that a human?
And evolve this.
You're done for.
I'm done sticking my
Then
toes
do
in
that.
the leaves.
But I was just warming
And
up.
then do that.
Speed things up.
And then do that. Yeah, that game definitely isn't good enough. Gamatsu has the same article here. Nintendo acquires Next Level Games. They don't really have anything to say. Nobody's going to have anything to really say around an acquisition for a while.
You wouldn't.
TechRaptor has an article here. Project Wonderwolf wants you to help Nazis win World War II. Okay. There's probably, for obvious reasons, not been a lot of games where you play as the bad guy. This looks very much like a Tiny Tower Fallout Shelter style game, and so it doesn't really feel like a game that needs to have that controversial aspect to it. You could easily just have your characters fighting against regular random enemies.
Fear and despair are no match for me. It won't be long now. The light of courage will pierce the darkness.
See, strike if the no allied dawn blades.
Shine forth.
Yeah, I don't think there's a justification to play a game like that. You're just asking for controversy, frankly. Now, see, in the case of like Red Alert, you're playing as the Russians often there, but then they did quite a bunch of things to make that not be a controversy, because you're like playing as these crazy different Russians from a different timeline in Red Alert, and I think you're the ability certainly to play as both the good guys and the bad guys is different than a game that is directly telling you have to play as the bad guys. That being said, there was a whole controversy a year or two ago about a person who claims to be a mainstream video game journalist. No, it was a YouTuber actually, that made this horrible, like, logical fallacy-filled argument that every multiplayer game where you might end up playing as the Nazis against an opponent that's playing as the Allies, is forcing you to be a Nazi against your will, which like it really just fell apart as an argument. It was just dumb, and even people that would have sided with the general sentiment, which was just kind of a pro-censorship sentiment once again, in new rapping, which that's what constantly happens, is you have people just pushing pro-censorship or pro-authoritarianism in new sheep's clothing every time, or many times. But, but yeah, I do think a game where you can play as the Nazis, you probably should have a mode for your own safety. You probably should have a mode where you can also play as the other team, even if you aren't really super interested in that aspect. Moving on, we have a TechRaptor article. Steam has added new features for the Xbox Elite controller and more. So, PlayStation 5 DualSense controller also now has some additional Steam functionality. Specifically, a new drop-down menu has been added for the PlayStation 5 controller personalization menu, which allows you to disable the controller's LED. You can also enable it only when multiple controllers are hooked up, or enable it at all times. What is the Steam abilities? Let's see, this update adds what Steam is calling extended Xbox controller support. If you've got an Xbox Elite controller or a new Xbox Series X controller, you'll notice rebind options. You can now remap the Elite controller's paddles in your configuration, while the Series X controller's share button is now a remappable key. Trigger rumble is now supported via the Windows Gaming Input API. It is now possible for you to connect more than 4 Xbox controllers to Steam, should you wish to. This will come handy for local multiplayer games that support more than 4 players. Okay, that's nice little improvements. Does that make me want to go out and get an Elite controller? No, they're far too expensive. I'm still very happy with my plugged-in Xbox 360 controller, but I may very well be forced to move up to a Series X controller eventually. But I definitely want a plugged-in system. I don't want to use batteries. Batteries were a nightmare, as they would die right in the middle of recordings so many times. Related to controllers, TechRaptor has an article here. Microsoft is surveying Xbox owners on DualSense features. They're, I guess, trying to figure out whether DualSense is something that they potentially might want. What is DualSense, though? DualSense, I think, was the force feedback on the triggers. Or maybe PlayStation 4 controllers are just called DualSense controllers now. Maybe they've changed the name completely. Getting a little bit of force feedback on the triggers might be interesting. Certainly, it's not going to be amazingly game-changing. In my opinion, just better quality and less drift would be appreciated in all controllers. If they're going to introduce paddles on the Elite side, they probably should introduce them as just a default ability. But I still feel like you need either a mouse wheel or somewhere on a controller, and they're going to have to figure out where to squeeze it, that lets you select more weapons. That we've got to get away from the weapon wheel concept. Somebody needs to do something revolutionary there so that you can switch between weapons a lot better. And if that really just boils down to that we need 2 D-pads here, perhaps one D-pad that is up, down, left, and right in a cross shape, and one that is more of an 8-directional rounded. Maybe that's the direction you go. But the number of weapons in games has been increasing for many years now, and the ways to select weapons has not improved at all. Like, if you just had a touch screen at the top here where you could potentially roll your thumb this direction to select something and roll your thumb here, and so not even a touch screen, it doesn't have to show anything, it just needs to be a touchpad, just something with some touch sensitivity there, that would be an improvement in my opinion.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Let's see, next we have a game on Steam called Day of Purgatory, which looks visually polished enough to actually call it a decent zombie first-person shooter game. Let's see. It's early access, it's $19.99, so it's online PvP and single player. I'm willing to put this on the fall list, but I'm going to have to come back to this and see if there's enough of a single player experience here. This very well could be one of those games that, even if it is a finished product and comes out of early access, would be so focused on multiplayer that it just wouldn't be something I would want to play. Let's see, we have the Famitsu review scores for issue 1675 from Gamatsu.com. Seems like Japan got a better list of games this week, because there was definitely one week where only one game came out. We have Blacksmith of the Sand Kingdom, a game I haven't heard of, for 30/40. Doodle Derby for the Switch, which is 28 out of 40. Fox and Forest for the Switch, which is 7, 14, 21, 27 out of 40. They didn't even mark it. You have Monster Sanctuary for the Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and Switch, which is 32 out of 40. And you can basically track the review score based on the number of consoles it's released it to. The more consoles they're willing to commit to, the better the score. Then we have Toho Luna Nights, which is 31 out of 40. And this is, I believe, Toho Luna Nights, which is probably the best game of that list, which still doesn't inherently mean I think you should play it, but it's something I am keeping an eye on. Here we have a game that's just Japanese letters, or Chinese letters. Looks like an RPG maker. It doesn't even show any people at all. 99 cents Chinese only. Nothing to say to that. That's just a category no. Let's see. A company called Acquire has announced a 3D dungeon RPG called Labyrinth of Zangetsu for the PS4, Switch, and PC. But just this concept art is all they really have to show. Ink Beast born from ink destruction. So they're potentially going to have a bit of a unique artistic design there. And that. And that. And hit that one.
You're a fool if you believe this is over.
Here we have a game on Steam called Asteroid Belt Try to Survive, which is just a behind third-person perspective shoot 'em up, which is a weird game. Certainly weird game design. 59 cents English only. Doesn't look like there's really anything here. if it kind of feels like somebody had a bad idea for a mobile game and then they ported that bad idea to
Flames will freeze.
um to Steam. Gamma Sutra has the same article. Minecraft Earth is going dark at the end of June. If that interests anybody.
Dragon Strike Blade.
不足でした。
Hmm. Let's see. What do we do now? Summon 5 serpents. Summon 1 more. Summon Medusa instead.
Behold the true form of this world.
This match is mine.
So on the 7th turn you play this and it spell boosts all the card in your hand. Or every card in your deck 9 times. Which you would think might be a game changer, but tends not to actually be. TechRaptor has an article. Pathfinder has announced a Guns and Gears playtest. Which, okay, I guess if you want to playtest a game called Guns and Gears, which I haven't ever heard of. Gamma Sutra has a blog here. Unity ray tracing get started now. As far as, I guess, talking about how you would implement ray tracing in software. I assume using Unity, although it could be very much in the back end that Unity will use hardware if you have a ray tracing compatible hardware device, but you don't inherently need that.
You grasp the sheer boom of infinity.
How do we want to do this? Can we do this? I think you do this.
For the sake of the future.
Then I think I lose. Ray tracing really is a game feature that has kind of failed so far to be really embraced. And that's not super surprising. It's going to be 2-3 years before we start to see just everything has ray tracing, and that is just the new thing that everything has.
Wait, how did I lose?
So far, it's been the selling point of a couple games, and that's about it. And so if I could go back, I would still be using my GTX 970 and not have bought a 2080. Or at least I would have put it off and maybe tried to buy a 3080, which would have been a second generation of that series and might have been a little bit better, but that's always going to be the case. I'm in certainly a weird position where my server has a 970 video card in it for very little reason. It's really hard to justify having a gaming video card in a server. I could easily get like a $50 desktop cheap video card and throw it in there and accomplish the same things. Honestly, I don't even know if I need to do that much because the onboard internal Intel graphics might work just as well for what is effectively mostly a headless system, meaning that you don't actually log into it to use a graphical interface. Moving on, we have a TechRaptor article. Conan Exiles Update 2.2 overhauls stamina and shields. I almost feel like Conan Exiles is not the latest Conan game, but I'm not sure that's right. Because, like, the Conan game I'm thinking about, you just were crafting and building things. And this doesn't quite look like that. It was like you would craft things and build things and fight other people. This looks like a very different game, although it could certainly still have crafting in it. The bigger issue, unfortunately, is I think Conan Exiles is not particularly well received regardless. Because I don't feel like any of the Conan games anytime recently have been well received. So, yeah. If we come over here to Conan Exiles on Steam, it's not on my wish list. Is that because it's online player versus player? Possibly. The complete edition of the game is $141. That's ridiculous. The standard edition is $40. Like, was this the game where you started off crucified and you could pick your dong size and they sold it on that, or is that a different Conan game? It'd be nice if any screenshots would load.
Shall gain meaning with your death.
Let's see. See what other Conan games show up on Steam. We have Conan Exiles, Conan Exiles, Conan Exiles. Conan Unconquered was 2019. Then we have Age of Conan Unchained, which is a free-to-play game. I don't think it's that. Then we start seeing Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes stories. Yeah. Conan Exiles must have finally got the message, I guess, and stopped focusing on the dong physics as a way of promoting their games, because I don't think that works well at all as an idea.
Succumb to the cold on the leaves of the Eshed tree.
Yeah, Conan Unconquered here is a top-down strategy, like tower defense game. And it's rated very positively too, which is weird. Certainly. So it has to be Conan Exiles. Exiles does make sense as a name for people. So it kind of feels like they have slowly been adding more content. The problem with this is that there's really not a single player experience. First sentence here, you have an online multiplayer survival game, so your experience is going to drastically change. I saw some YouTubers certainly play this and try and cover it when it was first out, and it's just not something that was ever going to work.
Is that human?
Let's see, evolve that.
I'm done sticking. I told you
Hit
to
that.
leave.
Hit that. Hit that. Hit that. Yeah, it really is a shame. They do say at the end here, survive in a vast open world sandbox, build your home and kingdom, dominate the enemies in single or multiplayer. But honestly, I just don't think there's a real experience, but particularly since you have the sandbox element also around Conan Exiles. So it's nice to see that they're putting out new tweaks, but unless they can drastically change it to make it a single player game, it's still not something I would want to play. Okay, Necromancy 4 is evolve this follower.
Want to play?
Why did that not work with the Necromancy 4? Next we have a game on Steam called Dom Russellock, which might just be a troll game or joke game around a Russian person. If anybody's screenshot it. I still have failed to go and try and adjust my router so that I can increase the chances of these thumbnails loading. It's Steam particular that's the problem. Steam just like gives up on them because it's got some kind of like JavaScript thing happening in the background that's trying to load the images while you're not looking at them, and it doesn't work. Yeah, this is $9.99. It's English and Russian. It does not look like it's a particularly interesting point and click adventure. There's not a lot going around here. It's maybe a horror game, maybe not. Kind of doesn't matter one way or the other. Right. This.
Let us make out eternal vows. Where's your sense of romance?
Sweet silence.
I need to hurry up. I'm gonna fall asleep at this rate. Gematsu has some gameplay trailers for the game Poison Control, which we've heard about Poison Control, but haven't had the greatest success as far as figuring out what it actually is. It definitely seems to have some very weird graphics. You're wandering around a very surreal, weird world,
It won't be long now.
and apparently in a 3D environment you might just be drawing squares around areas. There's some first person shooting happening, but then also you kind of have a draw the poison, you draw a circle around the poison and then that cleans the poison out. It feels like NIS's take on Splatoon in a lot of ways. See. Arguably that might be too much to do at one time, to run around and first person shoot in such a crazy world. It definitely seems like a crazy world. Yep, that really didn't explain much, but at least I kind of know what the gameplay is now. Let's see.
My hobbies. None of your beeswax. It's just business.
That
Darn it all.
and I guess in the turn. TechRaptor has the January Prime Gaming lineup. They're giving away when ski lifts go wrong, and alt frequencies, and Void Bastards, and Bridge Constructor Playground. They didn't have pictures there for those. Also, they're giving away loot for Star Wars Squadrons, Red Dead Online, Valorant, Madden, NFL 21, which honestly that feels like about half, if not a third, as much loot as you've gotten in the past. There is a job listing that came out that implied that Apex Legends developers are working on a new game that will let players adventure forever, which definitely seems like a games as a service. This is some website I've never been on, so it's chock full of ads popping up. Yeah, gaming forever or adventure forever. Sounds great when you think about Minecraft, and then sounds pretty terrible when you think about just a games as a service game where you're being asked to do the same thing over and over again. Fallout 76, you can adventure forever if you wanted to. Does that mean you want to play Fallout 76? No. Here we have a game on Steam called The Winter Sleigh, or Winter Sleigh, just Winter Sleigh. Which, this is crazy that this game came out January 6th instead of like February 6th or December 6th. Like, this actually looks like a fairly decent low effort Christmas game. If you were just desperate to look for a Christmas game, which I don't think very many people are, there's at least something here. It's $5.59 though, and that's too expensive. Slightly too expensive. Maybe if it was $2.99, I'd give it a chance. It's English only, which for Christmas you very well might want to try and target some other languages. It does seem to have a level editor of sorts, which that sounds interesting, but it also means you're basically just going to have to make your own fun. And that probably means there aren't very many interesting or varied levels that are custom made. I'm on a Spanish level story website, a fully Spanish website. Apparently the creator of Dishonored and Deus Ex is being interviewed. Unfortunately, it's all in Spanish, so I can't really read any of it or understand it enough. Yeah, trying to read Spanish would not make any sense. It's too complicated. I could maybe pick up a sentence here and there, and that's about it. So maybe somebody will translate that article at some point in the future, and we'll maybe come back on Friday and talk about it. Here we have a game called Eliminate Drops, which obviously is just a cell phone port of a low effort Chinese game. $1.19. English, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. You could, I suppose, assume it might be Korean or Japanese too. I'm going to stick with my guess of Chinese. Okay. Do this. And then do that.
No one else has to know.
Do that. And then do that. Still got a ton of games on Steam to talk about. Here we have a game called Actor Tycoon 2, which, yeah, there's nothing here of interest. $8.99 English only. Alright, I see the beginning of the end. Here we have a game called Horus Idol, which, again, is nothing. $1.79 English, allegedly full audio. Okay, next. Can we evolve something? Should we evolve something?
I've got to take a break.
Okay.
Go! Go!
Let's go ahead and
Fear not, for
evolve her. And do that. Next, we have a game on Steam called Driving License Test, which is an asset for low effort game. Early access $9.99 English only, nothing there. Yeah, I could have curated some of this. Here we have a game called Billion Beat, which actually looks like it might be a game. It's a boxing game of some sort. Are you doing it on a rhythm? Yeah, it's straight up like a Punch-Out style boxing game, which I've desperately wanted a Punch-Out style boxing game to come out on Steam. You might have to play it to the rhythm of the music, but you kind of had to play the beat people in Steam. No, in Punch-Out you had to basically play to a beat also. They just weren't playing the music beat in the game. This is $5.99. There was definitely patterns. That's what I mean to say. I'm definitely going to put this on the fall list. I hope this is good. I hope this isn't just something that plays terribly, which that is the thing that has been an issue in the past, is that there have been lots of things that just played pretty terribly. Right, well, fall of this.
Hey, check this out.
And then play this. And play this. Attack there. Play this. Apparently, you skill tree up your punches by going up nerves up your hand. Interesting. Interesting visual depiction there. Yeah, I'm fairly excited about that game, while still trying to be not overly excited about games that easily can let you down. Let's see. Here we have a game called PP Bow Peregrino Pinata Bowling, which looks like it is a uniquely animated style visual game. Seems to be slightly inspired by Viva Pinata and Angry Birds. It's $7.99 VR. There might be something to this idea, like knocking down Angry Birds characters is not a terrible thought. I'm gonna put this on the fall list, even though it's a VR game and I'd almost never play it anyways. There's at least something there. Okay. Hit that. Next, we have a game on Steam called Red Falcon, which is a Galaga clone, I believe. There's nothing unique here. 99 cents, English, Russian. Right, so we only need to do 1 damage now. Is Vengeance active for me? No.
The night will be stained in blood.
That. Then that.
I can devour your dreams.
And then I needed to had been able to evolve this and attack this, because all he has to do now is get 1 more damage and he'll win. And this will be quite the turnaround for him. Yep. He literally won. Although he would have won anyways. Had I not evolved something, that would have worked. Here we have a game on Steam that's Jing'an's District Categories, which looks like a Chinese visual novel where you're playing as cops, as it were, helping other people, just average citizens. Interactive fiction visual novel, English not supported, $2.99, Chinese only. Seems like there is a murder mystery that appears in this story, so it isn't just completely bland, generic experience. But doesn't support English, so there's no reason for me to cover it. See, next we have a game on Steam called Cinders of Hades. I can read things right. It's a VR standard one-play shoot-at-things game using magic in 2 different hands. And network's having trouble at this point. $11.24 English only. Yeah. I don't think there's anything here that's polished enough. It's kind of like a VR 3D missile defender game, which is at least slightly different, where your castle's getting destroyed by missiles or monsters. Gematsu has an article here. The Acquire president discusses potential Tenchu revival and new indies brand. The new brand and first title will launch in 2021. Okay. Not sure Tenchu is something people in the West are dying to have a revival for, but I bet there is a fandom out there for it. Here we have another political troll game, Save Daddy Trump, The Final Triumph. This time it is a 3D asset flip, running around, killing things, and you're playing with swords and bows, stealth killing people, and killing people, and you're playing as this, like, female character who, I don't know if this is supposed to be Ivanka Trump. It doesn't inherently scream Ivanka Trump. No, you're playing as a fictional Kiki Trump. English full audio, $1.19. Nothing there. Let's see. Next we have a game on Steam called Ralph's Adventure, Aztec Mystery, which feels like you are playing with a character like Star Tropics in what very much looks like a complete ripoff of the Adventure of Zelda visually. Like, honestly, this frankly feels like this may be just stolen art assets between Star Tropics and Zelda all over the place. $14.99 is way too expensive. English only. Yep. I don't think that's going to work at all. Even if it wasn't something that looked incredibly stolen.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Even if Nintendo managed to somehow figure out a way to make a new The Adventure of Zelda NES game, I don't think people would really want to play it for very long, not without completely remastering the graphics. And that's certainly a reason why I haven't done it. Also, even if you remaster the graphics, you probably need to remaster the game itself, because the Adventure of Zelda was kind of a mess where you couldn't actually beat the game without a lot of struggle, a lot of time, or a walkthrough guide.
You wouldn't.
We have this article here. the inclusive design pioneer Auguste de Lourdes has died of COVID-19 complications. He held key positions at Microsoft, Google, Pinterest, Vero. He seemed to probably have been wheelchair bound earlier than just COVID-19. He developed the modern Xbox interface and was a fierce advocate for inclusivity in design. At the very least, in this announcement of someone dying of COVID-19, it's someone who actually worked in the industry, whereas last stream the announcement was for a cosplayer, and I don't want to be cruel that when anyone dies, certainly, but being a cosplayer who's famous for only cosplaying as a stereotypical fat gamer covered in Cheeto dust, which is he's cosplaying a South Park character that is a stereotypical made-up character to ridicule gamers. That's not very well connected to actually gaming at that point. And certainly if we're going to start listing off everybody that's died of COVID-19, the list is potentially going to get very, very long. Particularly if any small tentative connection is good enough. Next we have an Open Critic article. The next batch of games coming to Xbox Game Pass has been revealed. So what games are they? Injustice 2, The Little Acre. The Little Acre coincidentally is airing on my channel right now as pre-recorded footage. So yeah. Games leaving the Games Pass soon will be FTL, My Friend Pedro, Sword Online, Fatal Bullet, and Tekken 7. Which you definitely don't get as much hype or a notification around the things that are leaving. Let's see, let's do that. And go ahead and hit that, I guess. Got nothing better I can do. Oh, darn it, it's this guy. I keep running into that guy. People keep playing it, and I keep getting wrecked by people playing it. Next, we have a game on Steam called Vapor Music Tour, which looks like an asset flip of just a 3D office model. Looks like it's a music production office. Frankly, it's probably an overly designed music production office. It's free to play, English only, so I guess that's fine. Honestly, if you're gonna make a music production company, you need to go pretty conservative on the budget as far as developing your office and how much square footage you use. You also need security, because you will just get straight up people who think that they're gangsters or are gangsters showing up wanting to cut an album or just cause trouble in general.
I will save you no matter the cost.
It's long past time for resign
There we
yourself.
go.
How much
Oh man, I cannot do anything. I've totally lost. Like, you hit this, you can do 1 damage, and that's it. Next, we have a game on Steam here called Soul Sensation, which you would think was a JRPG game with just an anime girl on the thumbnail, but it instead feels like it is almost like a box puzzle pushing JRPG game with an anime girl. Like, it seems like where you walk potentially does damage to everything around you. And there's kind of a puzzle aspect to everything. We're calling it a strategy RPG. But I'm seeing just a lot of text. It's very weird that there are some screenshots here that are showing multiple screenshots in one image, which makes no sense. There's a ton of text here. It's $2.99, which is a little too cheap, and it's English and Chinese. And typically when you do see a game that has just way too much text on the screen, it tends to be Chinese. Yeah, this makes no sense. Why would you ever make screenshots like that? That's just a waste of your time. I think I'm going to call it a day for Shadowverse. We are still short one victory, so it would have been nice to be able to get a victory here, but it doesn't seem like it's going to come easy. Here we have a game on Steam called Tears of Luna, which is a bullet hell shoot 'em up game that even by bullet hell standards looks like it has way too much visuals going on at one time. It's $3.99. Whole bunch of languages allegedly supported. Yep. Once again, shoot 'em up's not my type of game. Gamma Sutra has the same article. Sony discontinues all but one PS4 model in Japan. I think they also discontinued all models outside of Japan. That's certainly how I was taking the story. Let's see. Gamma Sutra has a blog here. Survive Another Night Development Postmortem, which I've never heard of this game, Survive Another Night, and it does not look interesting. So you're going to get limited bits of information, certainly, when you listen to someone try to explain to you why their game didn't succeed. Like, it is a very odd situation to say, listen to failures to find out how to avoid failing. The natural instinct, at least, would be to listen to successes to find out how to succeed. A lot of it arguably might be random anyway, so listening to anyone may not be worth your time. Anyways, TechRaptor has an article here. Raptor Boyfriend is an upcoming game where you can date a raptor. We have far too many of these Western dating games where it is joke first and foremost, and then actual game second. Seems like you have here maybe a Yeti or Bigfoot and some kind of insect wasp-like character too. Yeah, there's too many joke games, and frankly, if I was gonna in any way be fair, I would have to play a regular visual novel, Japanese visual novel dating game first, and probably play 2 or 3 of them first, to then even justify balancing things out and playing a joke one. Because you can't even understand what they're parroting if you haven't played the original games. And that puts in sharp highlight the issue at the core of it, is that you have Western game developers here that are parroting dating simulators and visual novel games that they themselves would probably never have played. OpenCritic has an article here. Everspace 2 hits Steam and Good Old Games this month. Which, okay, it's a space flying around game. Another style of game I'm not interested in, so yeah, it must be fairly popular if they're talking about it, but I don't think it's popular enough to make me decide to play a style of game I'm just not interested in.
Do you know my master? Cleansing mode.
That was delightful.
Hurry up. TechRaptor has an article about that game, Nerds, which, okay, fair enough. Zachtronics has had some major successes in the past, so they are relevant enough to potentially highlight that they put out a new game. Yeah, we have a game on Steam called Tales from Yoldberg, which looks like MS Paint level graphics, sometimes in 3D. Seems like it's kind of all over the place as far as its art style. It's free, English, allegedly full audio. I guess the price is right, but visually there is nothing here to attract me. Gamasutra has an article here, the best of 2020, the top 10 game developers of the year. They're saying Blizzard Entertainment. I would disagree with that. They're saying EA Motive. Alright, maybe. Never heard of the Game Band. I don't have a hard time actually arguing against a lot of these games because these games companies, because basically to be the best game company in the world in a year, all you have to do is avoid controversy and give decent customer support, and you're already miles ahead of most game developers. Let's go and hit that one and that one, and then we might as well evolve that one. Hit that. Yeah, like Inner Sloth here is the company that made Among Us. I didn't know that, so I can see the idea certainly as to calling the developer who supported Among Us and is putting more effort into it as a decent developer. And then they have like Lorraine Studios for Baldur's Gate 3, and if you haven't played Baldur's Gate 3, you don't know how well they support the community either. Metatronic for Fall Guys. Like, giving the Best Game Developers of the Year award to anybody is really just rehashing Game of the Year award, which is really, really hard to do for 2020. I've pointed out or said that several times in the past couple streams. It's just like, I'm very, very blasé as far as those kinds of awards, because they, first of all, don't matter, and second of all, there's not a lot of competition anyways. See, they're giving one to Nintendo EPD, which is maybe the European publishing division, or maybe the people that made Animal Crossing New Horizons. Supergiant Games. Yeah, it really is. A lot of this list is just like, oh, we like these games, therefore we like these developers. Whereas often there might be an argument against that very thought. And at a certain point also, because Gamasutra is so in the pockets of promoting developers and being on the side of developers and having the same opinion of developers, it's self-serving, to say the least, to potentially then celebrate developers. Let's see. Give me that. That. That.
Breach of contract, huh?
Do that. Not that. TechRaptor has an article here. Lego Island developers reportedly never received a bonus. Turned out they got laid off. Is the accusation. I think we talked about this before. This isn't TT Games. This was Mindscape, the company behind Lego Island. So it was one of the early Lego games before TT Games was making all the Lego games. And it wasn't like the TT games in the sense it didn't play anything like Lego Star Wars or any of those games. And yeah, I imagine that is the case in a lot of fields and a lot of careers where people owe you bonuses and they just fire you instead. Like, the idea that bonuses exist in the first place is just a form of bribery, in the same way that tipping is a form of bribery and corruption, and it's just complicating a system that shouldn't exist in the first place. It is much better for people to demand pay they are due first and foremost, not as a bonus, but as a guaranteed salary or hourly wage. Probably salary is better. I think the whole concept of hourly wage is also kind of a bad system. But yeah, demand what is due. Wage theft in general, it still exists quite a lot in the United States, where even salaried workers who work certain hours are getting ripped off and getting robbed, and there's not really any system out there that protects people from wage theft. There's a lot more wage theft that happens from employers that is atrocious versus an employee stealing a pin or working slower or taking more hours, or even contractors like charging more hours than they actually worked. Yeah. At least in my opinion, I bet that's the case. Like, and frankly, I kind of don't care if an employee robs the employer when you know how bad employers can be. Like, you really have to make a great argument in my mind that there is a great employer out there and he's just completely being taken advantage of by his employees. That's like, of all the bar rescues I've seen, of all the restaurants, was that Hell's Kitchen I've seen, it's never really been a case where employees are taking complete advantage of the employer and the employer being perfectly innocent. Like, honestly, in bar rescue, that there's maybe been one bar I've seen where there was a lady that was getting like treated somewhat bad by her employees, and it kind of wasn't her fault because she didn't want the bar in the first place. She inherited it from her spouse who died suddenly, and the bar rescue helped her like remodel and set up and decorate the bar to sell it because she didn't want to be in charge of it in the first place and wasn't capable of being in charge of it. But yeah, almost inevitably, if you run a business, you have to be extremely careful to not turn into a scumbag, and a lot of people fail at that. Anyways, video games. Speaking of scumbags, there was a dispute. I don't even remember what it was about, but I'm sure somebody was doing something. I think the publisher wasn't paying them, which is something we hear a lot of. The Sinking City has returned after a publishing dispute. A court case resolved in Nacon's favor. Or is it completely resolved? The Sinking City's Steam store page has progressed following a temporary injunction in a legal dispute between the game's developer Frogwares and its publisher Nacon, formerly Big Ben Interactive. And I think we've heard some bad stories about this publisher several times from several people. Last year, the Sinking City was delisted from several digital storefronts due to the publisher dispute. Frogwares alleges that Nacon was violating the game's publishing agreement. These issues are not easily resolved, and it takes several months for French courts to examine the case and make a determination. The legal battle is still in progress, but Nacon has elected to move forward with bringing the game back to digital storefronts following a temporary decision by the court. I think I've heard some complaints about Frogwares too, so and in this story, I wouldn't be surprised if both people were a little bit guilty. Which certainly, it's not a good position to be in where you maybe don't want to support a company, maybe you don't want to support a publisher. I definitely don't want to be pressured or tricked into buying a game that I'm not going to play just because it might be delisted. On the other hand, if something like the Red Candle game that was delisted and barraged off of Steam, if that game came back up, I'd almost certainly have to buy it because of the relevance around the controversy and the brigading of the Chinese government. Let's just face it, it's the Chinese government that's trying very hard to not have that game listed ever and trying very hard to make sure that company fails miserably. Speaking of the atrocities of the Chinese government, apparently there was a public announcement by several of the richer people in China, big corporate CEOs, and they've all now not been seen for like 3 weeks. One assumes they were rounded up and sent to quote-unquote re-education camps, but yeah, they may be thrown in jail or dead for all we know. It's not inherently video game related, but it certainly shows a lack of freedom of opinion and freedom of speech in China, which affects everything. Moving on, TechRaptor has an article, multiple Persona soundtracks arrive on Spotify tomorrow. I feel like this is a trap. Yeah, pull up the meme of the Star Wars guy saying it's a trap, because there almost certainly are people who are fans of the Persona soundtracks. I hear they're really good. And then people are going to try and play that while they stream. And the streamers are then going to get copyright claimed almost certainly for playing that music. Now that is true, I guess, at any point. Streaming almost anything on Spotify is probably going to get you in trouble. But I could certainly understand if some people thought that soundtracks from video games would be playable, particularly if you were talking about that video game or playing that video game. But very often that's not the case. So here we have The Sinking City on Steam. It is listed now as the Frogwares being the developer and the publisher. So I don't know how the resolution went in Big Ben Publishing / Raycon's favor for Steam when this is clearly being published, self-published at this point. And I think I own other Frogwares games, but it's totally like starting over with 2 reviews. Let's see. Yeah, I have Sherlock Holmes and the Devil's Daughter. And then there's some other point and click adventure games and Sherlock Holmes games in particular. This one's mixed reviews, that's why I don't have it on the wish list. Yeah, I think I got a bunch of the old Sherlock Holmes games just because I was going to do a series through it at some point. Yeah, it's questionable whether you really would want to play The Sinking City. It got reviewed and it was alright when it came out a year ago, but it being listed now only possibly helps it in the fact that maybe there just won't be that much competition and people will think it is a brand new game and people will be desperate for new content. Let's see, moving on, we have a game called Tracers Dreamlab VR, Traceur, which feels like they're trying to reference Tracer from Overwatch. And yeah, this seems like it is a collection of VR mini games and activities more than what you normally see. It's $16.99, English and a bunch of languages. I'm going to put this on the follow list to see if people like it. Like, the problem with spending potentially $600 for a VR headset is then you are going to end up spending at least $17 on something like this that is barely just an experimental game, something that you can have people come over and put their head in the VR headset and immediately know what they're supposed to do and understand things, because you're not going to really want them to play something like Half-Life Alyx, which is a much longer experience and more of a for the owner only experience. Next, we have a game on Steam here called SCP Escape Together, which this is the SCP Secure Control Protect website with the weird monsters concept that the game Control was loosely based on, and there's been several lower effort games that have tried to bend around SCP. This one in particular looks pretty terrible. It kind of looks like it's basically just asset flipping a map editor and nothing else. It's free to play, English, and it's online co-op only, so that definitely isn't going to work for me. The game Outriders has been postponed. But they're phrasing it as a good thing in this paragraph, and then it's not until you get to the third paragraph. We've decided to move the release date of Outriders to April 1st. No joke. We'll spend extra time tuning the game. I don't know if anybody's really hyped for Outriders, but yeah, it's postponed. Also, the King of Fighters 15 reveal trailer has been postponed. It's no longer planned for today, which okay. To postpone a reveal trailer is saying quite a bit. And that brings me to the Humble Bundle. So let's see. They have a comics bundle for Attack on Titan final season. Interesting. One Piece is going to put out its first 180 episodes on YouTube, kind of putting out 2 episodes a week. I mean, even if you do that, that'd be 90 weeks. That'd be 2 years. Although, in all fairness, I think most people would have already seen One Piece that want to see One Piece, or at least the first 180 episodes of One Piece. The Holiday in Space bundle is got 23 hours left. I don't recall seeing this Holiday in Space bundle on Humble Bundle. You can get Tacoma and Space Run for $1. You pay more than the average of $8.25. You get Deep Sea Derelicts, Siege of Centauri, and Rover Mechanic Simulator. And if you pay $10, you get a Vici Invector. $14, you get Breath Edge and Moons of Madness. It might be worth $1. I'm not really trying to spend extra money even for Humble Bundles, but it might have been worth $1 to get Tacoma, if I don't already own it, which is, I guess, the if. But yeah, otherwise we have no new game bundles. Seems like Friday, if the earliest, probably Monday, if I was to guess, will be a new bundle. And that brings me to my Twitter feed, and we'll see if I have any new news to really talk about. PUBG reportedly in development since early 2020. Okay, that's believable. And what else? Do we have any other news? My stomach is growling quite a bit today. I'm a little surprised. Genshin Impact reveals a Lost Riches event, according to TechRaptor, if you're interested in that. Apparently, we have an obituary of Kelly Flock, who was an influential Sony, LucasArts, and THQ executive. we'll talk about that. YouTube creators has a question here. Are live gaming creators published frequently? And I guess by YouTube standards that's true. I certainly do. How do you do it in a way that avoids risk of burnout? How do you balance quality and quantity? Well, how I do it specifically is I don't do much quality on my videos. Instead, go with quantity and actually play the games. Some things to think about when scheduling content, and then they've got a link here to give some hints. Hints that frankly probably won't be that helpful. Gamma Sutra has a blog here, an empathy-driven way to design games. I don't know if that's a good idea at all. I think that's a terrible idea, actually. I don't want to design a game around empathy. You might write a story around empathy, but games, in my mind, are mostly about turning your brain off and experiencing something you can't experience in the real world, which is often violence or at least something very different. I don't think I really want to empathize with half of the bad guys or half of even the good guys of video games. Warzone companion developers make changes after players use it to cheat SBMM. I don't know what SBMM is, but that might be an interesting article. What is that from? TechRaptor again, if you're interested. I don't play Warzone, so it doesn't matter to me. I think that's pretty much it. So not a lot happened over the 3 hours that we've been streaming. Yeah, there is certainly some craziness around the fact that these streams often go 3.5 hours. Like, I kind of wish they would not, but I don't know have really a good way to get around that other than to potentially stream every day. And that's not really what I want to do either. So yeah, the only important thing here is this Gamma Sutra article, an obituary for the influential Sony LucasArts and THQ exec Kelly Flock. Let's see. Flock spent decades working in the industry at a number of high-profile companies, holding several senior positions, including president and CEO of Sony Online Entertainment and serving as general manager of LucasArts Entertainment and THQ, executive vice president of worldwide publishing. In a funny way, he may have come in as a high-level manager and never actually really done much hands-on interaction with game development. Apparently he was the manager of the Twisted Metal designer David Jaffe. He was the exec who pulled the trigger in creating Sony Santa Monica. He's the guy who greenlit Twisted Metal 2 and Black along with Jet Moto. See that? You notice that you don't really have a lot. You really don't have a lot to say for upper management. And I don't want to pee on anybody's grave, but inherently this kind of is a statement when you look at a obituary like this for an industry insider. It is really a statement on how upper management can very easily do very little that is worth mentioning, because upper management often is just making pointless decisions, micromanaging decisions, money decisions. Like at a certain point, do you need a upper manager to tell you, yes, start this project, when that could have either been held by, been a decision that was done by the CEO or just by the game director themselves, who would be much more hands-on with the project anyways. Well, anyways, that's where we're going to end, on an awkward note, an awkward pause. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.